What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. I'm your host, Christian Baxter, and today's conversation is with someone who's been orbiting the same strange gravitational field many of us fell into years ago. Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke, Jonathan Peugeot, that whole meaning crisis constellation. Ian Campbell has spent the last 9 months developing a podcast not unlike this one, downstream from that world, hosting his own conversations at Insight Inc., a channel devoted to exploring, questioning, and investigating in search of insight. His conversation aimed to slow things down, look beneath the surface, and ask what it means to find a place in a world that feels increasingly disoriented. Ian didn't know about this little corner until recently. Then he came across Gray Hamilton's conversation with Jordan Hall. And as it happens for many, that one doorway opened up a whole new landscape. He connected with Gray, had a conversation, and started tracing the contours of this emerging ecology. Since then, he's been showing up on Luke Thompson's live streams as recently as today, which tells me he's already beginning to find the edges of this community and step inside the broader pattern of this conversation. He started talking with folks like Ross Bird, Joel Carlini, and a range of younger Gen Z voices who are feeling their way through this cultural moment with a kind of raw, searching energy. I haven't had a time yet to listen through his whole back catalog, but I can tell he's motivated. He has that hunger people get when they realize their private questions weren't just private, that there's a living ecosystem of dialogue and symbolic exploration they've unknowingly been a part of. So today's rando isn't really random. It's another crossing, someone who's been walking a parallel path, suddenly stepping into view. And in this corner, those crossings are often where the conversation begins to open up in unexpected ways. Don't forget, like, subscribe for channel influence, become a channel member if you want to support the work of this channel. And if you're listening on podcast, leave a review. That's really helpful. So without any further delay, today I give you Ian Campbell. So without any further delay, I give you Ian Campbell, Insight Incorporated. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Ian Campbell, we are rolling. Welcome to the Yours Truly podcast. This is, as I mentioned in the intro, so Gray connected us. You've kind of been following some key figures in this corner of the internet, namely Jordan Peterson, Peugeot, Vervaeke. Are like you've followed these guys, and
both them.
And then you saw Gray on having a conversation with Jordan Hall about education, and then you reached out to him. You had him on your podcast, which is called Insight Incorporated, correct?
Yeah.
And so kind of the thing, there's kind of a culture. I know you've been on Luke Thompson's live streams. You were on one today, actually. I saw you on there. And as things would have it, like there's like things called coming out of the lurk, and but you're already like grinding, you're already like wanting to explore, which is kindred to like the work I've been doing the past couple of years. But in the corner, there's this emphasis put on the person, not as much as we can apart, or to integrate the profile into the, so we people understand who in the internet that we, there's this profilicity, your profile goes out, but if we can try to come as close to understanding like the person, so that's Paul Vanderglay, like he was talking about Jordan Peterson back years ago, and it was dicey to talk about these things, 7-8 years ago, and he was one of the only people trying to do like a Christian synthesis from a Christian perspective at that time. And people, a lot of Gen X people were like older millennials kind of coming alive, coming awake during that time, and they would want to talk about it. They didn't know who to talk about it, so they would talk to Paul. And that became the heartbeat of like a community, kind of a social media community on YouTube around these ideas, these personalities and their ideas, Peterson, Peugeot, whatever. But also like friendships, and people got married and people met each, like all sorts of stuff, like real things happen. And that was all based off of like it being more than just the ideas, but also the person. And so that's a long intro to just say, Ian, tell us about the house and the home that you grew up in, man.
Yeah. Um, the home that I grew up in was in Palmyra, New York. So people who are familiar with Mormonism will know that that is the holy site. There were like 2 miles from where we grew up was the Hill Cumorah and all of the historical buildings there, and like the first Book of Mormon was printed in the town, and so that was pretty much unrelated to us. We just my parents had met in Buffalo, Clarence area, and then gone to different colleges, and then they ended up at the same Bible college, and then they got married and settled down. So I grew up there, and
What Bible college?
they went to CBC, I think, Cincinnati Bible College, and they were in the Church of Christ denomination. I feel like there's an important distinction to be made there, but I'm not familiar with it. Like,
Is it
people
United
sometimes.
Church of Christ versus like Campbellite Church of Christ?
Yeah, well, my name is Campbell, but I don't know the distinction, so I'm not sure which
Do
one.
they have
But
music in their
yeah,
church? Okay.
they did have music.
Like instrumentation?
Yeah, my grandma played the piano the
So
whole
it was
time that my.
yeah, it was probably United Church of Christ, not the kind of.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, keep going. So
Yeah, so that was a big thing on my mom's side. I think they were Christians, but then my grandpa wanted to be a pastor, so that was kind of like taking it and making it his own in a very significant way. It was his profession. So then for 50 years, he was a Church of Christ minister, and then his oldest son, my uncle, started a church over near where we live now, and he did that. He just retired after 42 years. And so my mom and my dad went to this Bible college, and they were musical. So then they had jobs doing that. My dad had gotten saved through Campus Crusade Ministries, although he also grew up in the church. So sort of in that vein. And then so growing up, that was what I did in the early years. Was I was the little kid at the church, and that, like all of the involvement of being on staff at church at the different things. And then that's largely stuff that I don't really remember. I think it was a big part of, my experience, but I don't have too many tangible memories of that. And then my parents went to a different church. They were working at my uncle's church, and then they moved. And so I'm not 100% sure on the details there, but they had Christian friends at other churches, so they would do the music here or there. And I think there was a little bit of like those pastors that would go around to different churches. Like it's easier than paying a full-time person if you just split it up over a few places. So we had lots of Christian communities that we were part of. And then and again, I don't really remember this as like a one Sunday we got sat down or something, but we didn't go to church on Sundays at some point during my childhood. And I think I've heard it described by my dad as like an attempt to demonstrate faith in, the other 167 hours of the week, to live life with God outside of the institution because it, it's life with God. It's not just institutions with God. And so that was definitely a big part of growing up. And big is kind of a weird way to put it, I guess, just because it wasn't overly emphasized, like, well, we don't ever, we're not going there. We don't do that because it was in our family. So, you'd go to grandma and grandpa's house and you go to church on Sunday, and we would still go occasionally. My parents actually had a cool opportunity. I mean, like Holy Spirit opportunity. Dad just had this idea like, hey, we know a lot of people around the country. We could go visit them and play music at their churches. And so they did that for 2 different times for a couple months. They took me and my brother the first time, and then me and my brother and my sister around the West Coast, and just kind of went from like couch surfing, sort of staying in extra rooms and playing music all around the country. So there were different, like, I remember.
Were they doing like originals or kind of leading worship? What was kind of the?
Yeah, you can find them on Spotify. Basic is their name, Brothers and Sisters in Christ, the acronym. And I think they have like 4 albums out. The Christmas one is a banger, so it's perfect time for that. But yeah, so Dad definitely wrote a lot of songs, and then they would just play worship music, contemporary, whatever was contemporary at the time. And this was like early 2000s. So, yeah, so it was definitely like an eclectic.
How old are you?
I'm 26. I'll be 27 at the end of the month. So, yeah. And yeah, so all of that, I think, was showing my dad a little bit of like the whole body of Christ, like in its fullness. And there were so many good experiences and connections across denominations and institutions and all of that. And he made a connection with a guy named Wayne Jacobson. I feel like he feels a little cornery to me, just getting the feel of the arena here. But he was some sort of Baptist pastor for a long time. And then he has written a book called He Loves Me. And I think it's some of the best work, like it's God's gift through him on God's perspective about you as a child of his. And it came from, I think, just a lot of like really trying to use the models of church to earn God's love. And that was sort of the way that Wayne grew up. And so he's been kind of exploring for probably the last like 30 years how to live life with God on a daily basis. And for him, that doesn't necessitate a weekly gathering. And so I think that was definitely a part of my dad's journey, because it was something that he was sort of already beginning to think. And then we were also homeschooled too. So growing up, I had a lot of individual responsibility, for my education. I got to pursue what I was interested in. I would write a lot, and it was like more creative fiction, thriller, novel stuff that never really turned into anything that I would let anybody read. But there was definitely like, I've always been creative on the big 5. That's my biggest one. It's like 97. So I've always contributed to whatever I've been trying to do in that way, and yeah. So I think, I don't know, like, I think that does a pretty good job of the home. I have 5 siblings, so big family. I'm the oldest, so that's a big important part of that. And yeah, it was definitely like, as far as the not going to church thing goes, Jesus was definitely the predominant authority figure in our house. Like everything that we did was involving or in reference to him, not in an obtuse way, but just like he was a part of our family's life in a big way. Like, yeah.
So did you were they still doing ministry when you were in high school?
No, I would say so a big shift from our no, not vocational ministry. A big shift from our younger years to just growing up, middle tween kind of years for me was there was a lot of kids. So we just did a lot of like being a family and getting raised. Uh, and the thing that was constant was definitely like connections and community that was centered around Jesus. Cause people always ask like, did you do home church? And by that, I think they mean like, did my dad read the Bible to us? He did, more on a daily basis than on a Sunday morning basis. And then, like, was there worship music at a point in time? And like, no, but yes, we did sing. And so, it was definitely like infused with sort of all of the elements that are distilled into a typical, Sunday morning gathering.
Yeah, it's interesting. So is I guess they what kind of what is your ideas of church like being kind of non like you said non-institutional outside the institution of the family? Um you, what was that like as far as for your faith? Was it just kind of like this is who we are? Were there like markers? Were there kind of like was there like a story that you kind of found yourself in related to your faith or related to that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, I felt like there was definitely uh, a synchronicity between being homeschooled and also not going to church, because the people that we knew uh, through school, they didn't go to school, but they did go to church. And then the other people that we knew, they didn't go to church, but they did go to school. So it's kind of like we didn't go to either. And that's kind of weird, for both parties. I remember reading, probably I was like 13. My dad had like a stack of good books, and he gives it to all the kids when they're about that age. And
Mm,
um, so I read, I think it was in Mere Christianity, where C.S. Lewis was talking about the way that you can sort of dupe yourself into thinking like, well, uh, you've got like half in the world and half in the church, and you're like, I'm more spiritual than my worldly friends, but I'm also more worldly than my spiritual friends. And you have this sort of the benefit of not being committed to either way. And for me, I think like my own, I just want to answer your question first, but it's attached to this thought.
no,
So
it's fun.
the the idea of like the story that I was living in according to my faith, I think that was definitely um, the water I was swimming in was a Christian worldview. So Jesus was an assumption, like he was naturally a part of that, and then and God and creationism and whatever, all of that stuff is just sort of assumed, and maybe even reinforced by education and all of these other things. And that was pretty much fine. There wasn't like a ton of uh, dissonance because of the people that we hung out with. Homeschool groups are the ones that we were a part of were Christian. And so it was all pretty seamless. But then when I was 9, I was introduced to pornography. And so that was like, I mean, it took a hold of my life in a way that I think disrupted the story that I was living in, because it was very naturally the story that I was a part of. I was in this family, I was in this home,
Right.
and that was the world that we were in. And so, yeah, so that began to definitely take a hold of me as I, transitioned into adolescence. And I started working around the age of 13. We knew some people with a farm, so I could work there. And that was definitely like, those things kind of conjoined to sort of like split me off, like, okay, I'm not like everybody else. I'm, you know, maybe I wasn't thinking like I'm broken, but I'm definitely like I'm aware of more stuff than just these regular Christian homeschool friends that I have. And then with that, I think the story is a really good way to put it. Like the story that I began living according to definitely changed um, because I was looking for something to make sense, I guess, of the corruption that was, that I was experiencing through what I mean. It was pretty much immediately an addiction to pornography. So
Yeah. So did y'all have like, he said when you turned 13 or something, you got like the stack of books. Was that like did y'all do baptism or Lord's communion at home, or like, was that a part of y'all's life, or was that too institutional? Like, that's kind of
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I haven't really asked my dad about that, like, as the sacraments. So no, we didn't do either of those things. Um, the but I don't think it was too institutional. It is a little formal, and it was very informal the way that
Yeah.
we practiced our faith. So it was never like, all right, guys, turn off the TV. We're going to do something holy now. So uh, I don't. I think that I remember hearing that my three youngest siblings all decided to get baptized at the same time, and they were on vacation in Vermont, so they got baptized in this outdoor hot tub at some place that they were on vacation. And so I remember that story, and it sounded really cool and really good. I ended up getting baptized later in life, and so yeah, no, we didn't have any of those sacraments.
That's interesting. So you're working on the farm, you kind of realize maybe you're like, you, for whatever reason, and however the exposure took place, but you're not as sheltered as some of the friends that you're around. You're like, you know, this secret maturity has entered in,
Mm-hmm.
and it's gripped you, and it's a shame, you're ashamed of that thing. So it's like, addiction is directly tied to shame. And of course you would, in that kind of situation, it's like, I can't talk to anybody like about that stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
uh so carry on through high school, work, I don't know, stay working at the farm or whatever. um that's the pattern. So what happens either into high school, what happens in college, or did
Yeah.
you go to college, or like, what's kind of the
So, uh, so they're connected. I would say the uh, the pornography addiction eventually became discovered, and so my parents like knew, and then it was sort of like a little bit of a battle. It was kind of at first like, oh, I'm so sorry, and then it was like, no, this is something that I would prefer to do as long as you don't know about it. And so there
mm-hmm.
was a duplicity there of like, if I can get away with it, then I'll just keep doing what I like. And I think the what I like part was sort of what I discovered, because I tend to be like fairly conscientious. I'm a little bit lazy, but conscientious at times, especially when it comes to like what other people are thinking of me. And so with that, I think I probably for the first bit of my life grew up wanting to make sure that my parents were happy. And then from that point on, I was like, wait a second, I actually, this kind of feels good. This is like awesome for now. And then I sort of started like sacrificing trust in relationships and all of these other things to myself, and my like pleasure really. And then as that goes on, it's we didn't watch certain movies, and we didn't do sleepovers, and we didn't do this, and we didn't do that. And there's a joke in my family amongst the siblings about like uh, we don't is the family motto, and
Yeah,
and
I relate. I resonate. Yeah.
yeah. So with that, I think I sort of started to understand like, oh, I can, like
Mhm.
if nobody knows, then this is how it could be. And so with that, I started to like take in new information wherever I could get it. So turned for me into like sort of a lot of consumption of media that was not maybe age appropriate. I don't know. I was like 13 or 14. So at that point, could have been more mature than I was maybe. But I really enjoyed comedy, which is almost, assuredly the uh, darkest or, most innuendo.
Profane. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with that, I started to learn about things through sort of a weirder lens, even than pornography, because it's sort of like making fun of some of those things. And that doesn't really gel with like my parents are like, sex is for marriage, and this is somebody's daughter that you're looking at, or don't you want to be better for your wife, and like I'm like, yeah, that makes sense when I'm talking to them, but it doesn't make sense when I'm like thinking about uh sex on my own. And so I started sort of grasping at like, what can I get that I was told that I shouldn't have? And I started smoking like cigarettes at 16, like stupid stuff like that. It wasn't fun. It was horrible, but it was like something that I could do that was forbidden. And then I mentioned sort of the comedy and the media. Like I love movies, and because that became a big part of my life. So in high school, I was a part of a theater company, definitely a Christian one. And it was pretty serious. Like the lady that ran it had gone to school for theater. So it was creatively enticing to me. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't a total joke or only Christmas pageants or something like that. And so I had a lot of fun with that. I started a sketch comedy group, and we tried to make that work. It didn't really, but it was fun to try. And I started doing a little bit of stand up as I was graduating high school. And so the performance arts were a big deal to me at the time. And it was a good creative outlet because that is who God made me to be. So, despite not necessarily having a connection to God throughout this period, I was definitely still like made to do that, create and perform, and yeah. I listened to, I think it was the one today, your podcast that came out today
With
with
Cadell.
Cadell,
Cadell.
yes.
Okay.
And you mentioned the comedians being the only ones that were able to speak during COVID. And I think this might be a little narcissistic, but I think that sort of maps onto my trajectory, because at the right before then, I was like, comedy is the most important thing. And I was obsessed with it because it was challenging these ideas. And I hadn't run into Peterson on my algorithm yet, but I was definitely like this weirdo, homeschool Christian kid. But I needed to I needed to say things that I couldn't say in a sermon. My friend said at one point, like, man, Ian would be such a great pastor if only you could swear. And like, it was that was just a part of who I was. It's like corrupted, but I want to talk about what's true. And that's usually, I think, how comedy works. They're
Yeah.
identifying something that you can't talk about that's true.
Yep.
So I was in the theater company, I think, last in high school. And then I graduated, needed a job. I got a job in a factory. I had this idea, like, I'm going to move to Chicago and do Second City improv classes and see what I can do out there. And but I was working at the factory to save up money. And I was listening to the Pat McAfee show over and over. He's from Indianapolis, and he does, I think he's on ESPN now, but he does like sports comedy stuff. And so I was like, oh, it's perfect. I love sports. I love comedy, and I'm going to make it happen. So I drove out one weekend. I like took, penalty points for missing shifts and stuff. And I was like losing my mind in this factory,
I bet.
and so I just drove out there and stayed at a hotel. And then in the morning, I got up and I knocked on the front door. They just have their address on the internet, I guess. So I just knocked on the front door, and the girl that works there, she's like a part of the content, so I knew who she was. she answered the door and she's like, can I help you? I was like, I don't know. I'm just here. I explained the whole thing. I'm from New York and here I am. And she's like, I'll maybe after they're on the radio now. So maybe like after that. And I was like, yeah, I can come back later. I started walking away. And then like before I crossed the street, she came back.
Oh, we're kind of roboting here, signal wise. So you were going up to this club and you said she was like, we're rolling right now or something. And then you were walking away.
Yeah. So I was walking across the street and then she called out to me like, hey, come back. He wants you. He wants you to come back. So I go back in. It's their office. There's like a half court basketball hoop in there. I'm like, this is insane. And I go into the radio studio. They were like live on XM radio, and they're in between. They're in the break, and he's like asking me questions like, who the hell are you? What are you doing here? And he's like, all right, I'm going to interview you for the job on the air. And so it's like,
That's
come
awesome.
back. It was so cool. And so they came back from break and they're just talking to me. We talked about like if you went to college or not, and I wasn't going to college. So the not college people were like, yeah, go not college. And they liked that segment. So I stuck around and he's like, here's the news topics from today. Write a joke and you can tag every segment. And so I did that and yeah, and we hung out and gambled on opening day of baseball and got Burger King. And I was like, sweet. So do I got the job? And we shook hands. He's like, yeah, I'll bring you back as an intern. And I went back to New York. And then like 2 months later, he split off from Barstool and kind of cut bait with all of his interns. So they kind of moved back to Barstool, the interns, and then him and his core group went on to just be their own thing. And so I got kind of caught up in the wash there, or maybe he didn't want me or whatever, but it's just like that's what happened. And I'm sitting there at my box factory, like I hate my life so much. So I moved to Chicago the end of that year and just tried to make it work there. And definitely I just kind
What
of
year
got,
was that? What year was that?
that was like, it would have been late 2018.
Okay.
And so I, when I moved out there, I was 19 and, yeah, I found a hostel on Airbnb and it was like $18 a night for a bed. And they had like bunk beds in these rooms and it was crazy. Like there was a dude that was shot on the next block over from where I was living the first week that I was there. And it was as bad as like you could expect. And my parents definitely told me, don't do that. And I did it anyway. So yeah, I just tried to make it work. I got a job at a restaurant and started hanging out with that crew. There was a lot of like drinking and drugs, and I didn't have any sort of exposure to those things. So I was like, yeah, why not? And those are famous last words. So I spent a long time doing drugs and drinking and trying to do comedy in between those things. And that's definitely part of why comedy didn't work out. It doesn't work out for everybody. I'm not that funny, but I just was everything was a dissipation. All of my energy was going different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling all of this, well, it's because it's a rando, but also because it really was a rock bottom sort of experience eventually. So I just had a particularly debauched night of drinking out all night and cocaine was involved. And so that I feel like is a good drug to make you hate your life and not in the moment, but definitely like in the come down. And so I was doing that morning and I like got back to my apartment. I was like, I cannot keep doing this. Like this,
Mm.
I know Lucy with the football, like, or Charlie Brown with the football. It's the same story every time, and
Yeah.
I keep thinking it's going to be better. So I like ran a mile and puked halfway through, and then again at the end of it, I was like just trying to be better. Because meanwhile, I was like consuming as much Joe Rogan as I possibly could, and that it's a weird balance because it was like, yeah, this guy is hilarious, and Ari Shafir's on there, and those guys get it. They're like into psychedelics or whatever, and uh, and then also just the pain and suffering of a life that's built on substance abuse, and so but he's also talking to Jocko and Tim Kennedy and all of these other guys. So I'm like kind of disoriented. And finally that day, the Jocko pods got locked into my brain. Like, I've just got to do something about this because it's going to be up to me. And I'm sure I'd probably heard Jordan Peterson at that point, although maybe it skipped off the surface. But
I like that. I like that metaphor.
yeah. So at some point in this time, there was another night where I was like kind of freaking out on cocaine, and I was like, I need to go home. I need to go back somewhere safe and just like stop, just push pause and reset. But I can't go home like this. Like I
Mm.
just kind of felt gross about the way that I was, and so I prayed, is how I would characterize it. It was sort of like the God, if you're real kind of thing. Not really with much familiarity, but I just asked for him to arrange that. And then COVID happened like a few months later, and I had no recollection of my prayer at the time, but COVID happened. And so comedy gets shut down, restaurants get shut down. And it gets like sort of the civil unrest starts building. So like there were Walgreens being looted and stuff like that near me in my neighborhood. I'm like, I don't have a gun. I don't trust my roommates, like in a fight at least. And so I just moved home because they were saying it's going to be 2 weeks, 2 week lockdown, and
To
we'll be
flatten
over
the
this.
curve.
Yeah. Uh, and it turned out to be a lot longer than that. So I was home for 2 weeks, and the government was paying me, and so I was like, well, I guess I can just stay here. And things really started to shift. So that the sort of water I was swimming in when I was growing up of Christianity and Jesus is just assumed turns into like, it's like a bright light or something. Like it was astonishing to me. Like, wow, my family is so different than everyone that I've been spending my time with. And there were actually, we don't need to go into them, but there were lots of cool God moments in Chicago where he was sort of like calling me, or yeah, just calling me. And um, so it didn't work, like I wasn't paying attention. But looking back, you can see them. And then when I got home, I was definitely more open and receptive. And so I was watching tons of the more positive Joe Rogan episodes. Tim Kennedy for sure. Like you got to be way better than you are. And I was like staying up late to play Red Dead Redemption and smoking weed.
Nice.
And oh yeah, it's lots of fun. And the smoking weed part is like, I definitely always identify that in this story as like, how come nobody else does this? Like all the people in my family are just like, okay, and they have their problems or whatever. But that one stood out for me as like I pretty much didn't drink because they didn't drink, and maybe like had a few beers here and there, but like me. And that was okay. It was a little weird. Like I had them in the fridge, and my parents were like, "Oh no, it's totally fine. You're an adult," or something like that. And uh, but it was definitely, there was tension. And then the smoking weed is like, that's illegal, so they didn't like that. I'm not going to let them know about it. But uh, that was sort of like the way that I functioned. And so it was at that level of uh, need. And for them, it wasn't there. And so without directly associating that with like Christian faith, I started to like examine that. Like, why are you okay? Everything's kind of going to hell, like the world was on fire. I remember being like deeply disturbed by the BLM stuff. Like, I don't think this is good either way, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily being portrayed appropriately in the media because I grew up, not trusting the media. But then also, I don't think that it's good that police officers are doing this or that. And it was just a lot of tension in me. And so looking for that to resolve, I started to talk to my mom. I would like go uh, drink with some friends here and play cards or whatever. And then I'd come back and my mom would be up. And so we'd just talk. And it was very therapeutic and healing to just ask questions. She was very open and amenable to answering my questions. Like she really, um, she's a good listener. I think that was a lot of it. There was a lot inside of me. Um, you mentioned shame and addiction. I think there was a lot of shame. So it was good to be like, I didn't necessarily like confess everything because it's my mom, but it was a lot of like, what is the right way to do things? Sort of that end of the spectrum of questions.
Wow. So that's leading up through COVID. You're home. You skipped off Jordan Peterson, but somewhere between, I guess, 2019 and 2020, early 2025, where you've put out, I don't know, 15, 20 episodes or so. No, 25 episodes, podcasts in the last 9 months or so. What's the journey to Insight Inc. from that point? Like,
Yeah.
and I'll just list, like, let's see, you got one, How to Listen to Jordan Peterson, Growth, Failure, and Pursuing Your Passion, Jesse Walker, Christian Realism Unleashed with Joel Carlini, Philosophy, New Age, or Jesus, This is the Water, How We Think About Our Lives. Like, these are the kind of topics, Charlie Kirk, Suffering and Jesus, Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard's Case for Faith, So where did all this start to spill in?
Yeah.
Now that it's pouring out.
Yeah. Well, I definitely I got sober in like let's say 2021, the beginning of 2021. Also the beginning of 2021, I started a Christian discipleship program that was it is based in New Mexico. It's this one, the 10th Hour Project. You probably can't see that, but and so they're like based out of Calvary Chapel, but it's all focused on evangelism. It's just this guy and his wife. Stateside, it's Dave Chafee and Deanna Chafee, and they host. It's like a gap year program, so it's typically people probably 19 to 25 at the oldest, and usually younger. And so it was kind of like a college experience for me, in a very like a micro college kind of orientation. And so I got to do some biblical studies there. I mentioned my sobriety because I'm only moderately sober, although I am not drinking currently. I just say that for like AA people. It's not like I don't do it that way. But the sobriety, I think, like my brain came back. I just felt a huge shift in my capacity to read and retain information. And when I got saved, it was like March of 2020 to June of 2020. That's sort of the window where I was being called and coming
What was
back to
that
Jesus.
process? Yeah, what was that process like?
Yeah, so that was a lot of those conversations with my mom were sort of on the front end of that. And then all of my friends were kind of like, they just stayed on the Christian train. So they were comfortable believing in God, going to church, and doing the right thing, so to
Were your
speak.
parents going to church, or were you going to church with your friends?
So I was going to church with my friends. I got a job with one of my friends, working for a guy doing construction. And then and then I would go with him sometimes, and we would definitely just talk about it, because the guy that owned the company, he used to go to this church, and he was doing like protecting women in Buffalo work. And so like he got threatened, and his family threatened like with their lives. And he stopped doing it. And so he has this sort of, I think he just has a lot of like guilt from that story in his life of like, it's like the whole thing with Christians. Will you recant your faith if there's a gun in your face? And I think he kind of had that scenario and felt bad about how the outcome went. But
Worries he failed the test or something.
right. And so it became very difficult for him to be a part of that fellowship. And so he had some contradictory points, also a marijuana user. So that was definitely a sticking point with the church. And so me and this boss and my friend would have conversations sort of theologically oriented all day, or maybe even like ecclesiologically oriented. And like I said, so my mom started answering questions that I was having. So I was asking. The Rogan podcasts were coming through, and I don't know, we could probably look, but I bet you anything that there was a Peterson episode, because I got turned on to the Genesis lecture series because it must have been mentioned. And I just watched all of them, like binge watched them. I was had a lot of time on my hands because it was COVID, and I could not believe the ways in which he verified the truth. Like it was like it's not Peterson, it's the Holy Spirit in that moment speaking to me. It could have been any of these mediums, but Peterson, his views on like, I always bring up this example, and I like when you're trying to tell somebody a scripture that you read, and you're like, it was really standing out to me, and they're just like, nah, man, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's how I feel about the Genesis lectures, because they were so true that it almost didn't matter if they were, I would say, propositionally true. And that was something that like I'd never experienced before. And it wasn't necessarily that I needed to like break free from creationism, or I had these contradictory evolutionary perspectives, but it was like, whoa, this guy is saying the truth of this story from the Bible, and creationism or evolution could be true, and it doesn't affect his truth. Like these things are true almost biologically, but even deeper than that, like however the biology came to be, the truth that subsists beneath that is substantial. I'm like, okay, I could put my feet on that. And for whatever reason, that's where all of those podcast titles come from. I think if you trace it all the way back, is like I discovered philosophy and and like reality, and the ways that those two things can coincide. And I like telling people that Jordan Peterson like got me saved. Like he's the one that did that, because it's kind of true. That was the catalyst of like, oh, okay, this is really, 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 really true. And now what do I do about that? And then the follow-up questions kind of, I think it was easy enough for me to kind of slide back into a Christian faith there.
Like a practice. So you didn't grow up doing baptism and the Lord's Supper or anything like that. You said you got baptized after this. Like, how did that work out? What was that process like?
Yeah. So fast forward, the friend that I was working with, his mom heard about this 10th hour group, and that's how I ended up there in New Mexico. It's 3 months of sort of biblical training. So there's different teachers that come in from around the country, different pastors fly in for a week of teaching. There's a few guys that live in that area, and they do sort of the more daily courses that you're going through. There was biblical surveys and all of that. And then you get to tour, which is a really cool part. So we went to different churches all through the United States, and we had like a presentation on, it's called conversational evangelism. That's like the name of the presentation. And it's really just about like living an authentic life with Jesus, and then telling people that you run into at the grocery store or at your job or wherever. And so we would go to churches, do our thing, and then hang out with the people there. And that was really cool to see. Like, it was a lot of Calvary chapels. They have a lot of close relationships with Calvary Chapel churches, but there were other ones. I think Baptists probably were the only other ones because they're buddies. But the experience was really good to just see all the different types of people that God has saved, and God is living his life, and they're living their lives with him. And so, sorry, what did you ask me
I
about
guess was that the
specifically?
process of getting baptized?
Oh yeah. So I was in we were in Utah, and we had just gone to Bryce Canyon, and we did like a ride the ponies thing, and we ate at the lodge or whatever that we were staying at, and they had like the worst food ever, and I got horribly ill and was just losing fluid all through the night, every possible way that you can do that. And uh like hallucinating. I was so out of it. And uh so it's a travel day the next day. I'm like texting people, can you get me some, Pedialyte, something? I'm dying here. And I whited out because my blood sugar was so low on the drive. I was like, I can't see, like freaking out. And so I had a really traumatic situation. All right, Ian, you don't have to go to church this morning. Praise God. And so I'm like sleeping at the Airbnb. I wake up 9 a.m. and I'm like, huh, I'm fine. Like, I feel great. I'm super bored sitting here. Hey, can somebody come pick me up? Somebody comes pick me up and brings me back. And I sat there, and they were teaching on Acts 2:42 or whatever that is, where I don't think that's the right that's like the fellowship one, but he was doing the one where he's talking about being baptized, and they were doing a baptism service, because if you talk about it, you got to do it. And I was like, I was captivated. It really struck me, like, oh yeah, like, at least in their structure, it is an outward sign of something that is inwardly being done or has been done. And so I was like, I gotta do this. Like, can I get in on this? And of course, so I got baptized in St. George, Utah, and yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's interesting. It's an
Yeah.
interesting contrast because like the contrast between there's this institution that has like a form and a structure related to the narrative and the belief within scripture that affords that right that ritual that to a way in which that's enacted and embodied is through like the institution having kind of a channel or a pathway for that to not that it sounds like your siblings found their way to some immersion
To some
baptism,
water. Yeah.
but it was like, yeah, yeah, it's interesting contrast. So that happens. You do this program that really is, it's like a discipleship program. It's
Mhm.
really powerful. And so was that after COVID or was that during
It was just after COVID, so it was
22,
2021.
21? And
Yeah.
so
Well, and kind of during, because the end of the trip, you go to, well, we went to Uganda. There's a few different
mission, yeah.
places that they have foreign missions, and when we were there, things got shut down in Uganda. So that was
Mm.
wild.
Yeah, I bet. So you were y'all worried about getting stuck over there?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Not me. I didn't, like, it's whatever. They
Yeah,
had
like, this
food
is
and
cool.
energy. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so what obviously Peterson had a profound impact. If you like, he basically evangelized me through scripture. Like you needed some kind of the way you were describing it was like something that I can really stand on, like something like, you know, the ground of your being and of your posture into the world. Like, oh, I really feel like I can trust this. I can. believe this. I have, there's like maybe I have faith in the events that they happen in some way or another, but this also gave me like a faith in, like a deep spiritual faith, a deep spiritual truth related to this creation narrative. And so profoundly impactful that you baptized in 21. Uh, so how did we get here?
Yeah. So after the program, I had an opportunity to be an intern at a church in South Carolina that's associated with it. And so I did that. My wife stayed on at the program as an intern there in New Mexico.
When did you get
And then
married?
we got married. Oh yeah, I met her in the program. So
I won't tell her. I won't
2022.
tell her you left that detail out.
Yeah. We have a son too.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, a lot of life has been happening. Well, we keep going back and forth, so it's like it'll all come out eventually. But yeah, so I met her through the program, which was really cool, because that was something that I wanted. Like I wanted to be kind of like my friends. They had girlfriends, they had businesses, they had houses. These things they invested in. I invested in fun, I guess, and kind of just lost everything. I was broke and had not gotten really anything in return,
Hmm.
um, except public speaking. I can do that because I did a lot of open mics.
And you did
But
that program with the church when y'all travel, or with the y'all would travel to these churches and do a program. So and this,
so
well, the thing is, those like that's also part of Peterson's work, which is like getting your shit together.
yeah,
So
100%.
was that like mixed in with that?
Um, yes, I would say that the getting my shit together part of my life was that was definitely starting to happen when I decided to go on this trip. And I really thought that I shouldn't do that. And I prayed about it and I was like, okay, fine. Like I was getting the answer to go, but it was like another 8 unproductive months. And I was like, I will definitely not have a job. I will definitely not have a wife. I will definitely not do any of the things that I think are maturation. But it was seminal to all of that. I got my first real job opportunity out of that and met my wife. And those were two huge things that I was looking for. And so God really set me up that way to get organized and be discipled, like learn how to sort of integrate faith into myself, into my life, and have a relationship with him that sort of was fundamental, and then build those other things on, which I didn't understand that at the time, but definitely needed to happen.
How do you relate your Christian foundation? Like you probably knew a lot of the Bible stories, you knew a lot of
Yeah.
like how does that connect to, okay, now I have my own Christian foundation? Like, do you think that's part of the foundation? Do you think that that's like there was that doesn't like what's the relationship between this Christian raising and then this kind of uh awakening, personal awakening to scripture or whatever? Like how do those things, how are they in relationship for you?
Yeah. I think that the foundation that was laid is I th- I'm pretty sure it's exactly what my dad wanted. There is a very tangible, real life reality to the existence of God, and sin in my life destroyed that story that we were talking about earlier, like the narrative of that, and my role in life as a child of God, because that's how I was raised as a child of God, and sort of like freely, like because he loves me, and that's the way that it is. And that childlike understanding was destroyed. And then from that point forward, I tried to understand something that I didn't really have a good grip on, but like the world or just any alternative narrative. And so in returning to it, I do think that there was a lot that I just kind of saw through with like, hypocrisy is always the story of like the deconstruction crowd. I, we didn't go to church, so I couldn't really see through a lot of Christians, I think, but I definitely had a sort of like, okay, yeah, but how does this apply to me? Or why does it matter, that Jesus rose from the dead? There was just sort of
Yeah.
a functional question that I had about it all. And because of that, uh, and because of the shame, I just definitely stayed away from it. Like, that's not for me. That was kind of my attitude about it. And then what shifted was the understanding that it was for me, and it was deeply associated with the shame that I was feeling and was, consuming me. And the healing through relationship with Jesus, forgiveness, but also like transformation, all of these things were like actually happening in my life, to the point where like I uh, I stopped watching pornography for the first time since I was 9, when I was whatever I was, 21 or 22 in 2021, and that was it. And so that was miraculous in my life, and I just recognized the power, like I don't know how else to put it. And so as far as the way that I was raised, I think I came back to it definitely with fresh eyes, like, oh, these things are significant. These things are more than just preferences, because a lot of it seemed to be, I still make fun of people for, like political preferences in their faith. It's like Jesus wasn't a Republican. And so I don't think that necessarily qualifies you, as a Christian, just because you vote a certain way. And so I think I came back to it with like a reverence and a recognition of the power, but then also just some like of my own perspective, like, okay, I don't think I need to do this to be Christian. I don't think I need this aspect of it, because I was starting fresh. Like my wife grew up in the Calvary Chapel tradition, and that's all she knew. And so everything that happened at 10th hour was like, yep, been there, done that. We do this all the time. It's the same way that I know that it is. But for me, I was like, what the heck? This is crazy. Like, this is so cool. This is so special, And I think it really gripped me.
Yeah. Something like it's the emphasis being on is this true because it happened like historically? Can I, versus is this true because I'm experiencing these truths like that Peterson was talking about? I'm experiencing them in my real life, like that kind of more like archetypal truth. That's that I think that was, at least for me, this what's the relationship? It was a foundation. It was, and there were real things. I did have real faith, I believe, but that's just kind of that's a story I've told a lot on here. So, yeah, still working our way towards why you started a podcast 9 months ago.
So I feel like you keep asking me the jump ahead question, and I keep
You don't have to jump ahead.
back.
I'm just saying, I'm just saying, like, whatever it takes to get there. Yeah, it's not, no, don't jump to that point, but like, we're going somewhere. How we get to this point?
So I was offered this internship at a church in South Carolina. One of my teammates from the group that I went through the program with was from that church, and so I had a friend there. I liked the pastor. He liked so it all checked out. That's awesome. I went there. I was like, this is pretty cool. And then I was talking to my wife, and it's like, progressing, but kind of now long distance. So I was like, I kind of like, you're not allowed to date in the program. So I like threw it out right at the end. And
Nice.
I was like, I'll marry you today. And she was like, no way, man. That's crazy. And so, yeah. So then it progressed eventually to the point where we were at least in a relationship. And I was like worried about that. So I did my 6 months at the church, and She was wrapping up her internship and moving back home. So I was like, I'm going to move back to New York, I guess, and just try to get married to her. And so that worked out. And then we eventually got married in the summer of 22. And then we were working at the Christian school there. Her parents run a church that has a school, and a little nepotism, and we got jobs, and they needed jobs. Or they needed
That's right.
teachers. And so we were doing that and felt like God was calling us to South Carolina. She did, which was insane because she's from the smallest possible town, and she knows everybody and everybody knows her. And I'm just this weirdo kid that married her, and that's my role in the town, like, oh, that's her husband. And so I was like, okay, I'll pray about it, but I don't see how this is going to be possible. Like that, they offered me a job, and the time kind of went out on that, and it's not going to happen. And I was like, God, I think I really want to have a real job. Like I was the science teacher, but I'm not a science teacher. Like I'm just making it up. I'm telling kids that some people think 6,000, some people think 15,000, some people think a billion or whatever. And I'm there like, we have never heard this before. Like, stop saying these heresies to us. And so I was praying about it, and the wind was blowing northeast, and that hit me in a spiritual way. And I don't really even believe in that sort of thing. So I was like furious with God. Like, I cannot possibly believe that this is the way that you're communicating with me. The church that we were seeing if we could go to is called Calvary Chapel Northeast. And so I was like, come on. And so I got back to my wife. She's like, did God say anything? And I'm like, no, he didn't say anything. And I was like reading my Bible, and I read, I think it's Nahum. Never read it before. Saw it earlier that week. I was like, I'll give it a try. And like the second verse says something about God speaking in the whirlwind. And I was like, this can't possibly be what's happening to me. So I told her, I was like, yeah, I think he said because of this and this that we should go. And I was pretty stoked because I wanted to, like I said, just start growing a little bit, be maturing. Like, okay, now I'm gonna be an intern pastor here, and they're gonna pay me. And so I reached out to them. They said yes. We talked to family. They cried and said, no, please don't do this. And we did it anyway. So 23, the middle of 23 to the middle of 24, we moved down there, and it was really good. Lots of cool stuff. I got to preach, and I didn't have to be the youth pastor because some other people had just gotten that job. So I was like just the generic extra pastor. And that is, I think, more suited to what I'm capable of than youth pastor stuff. Is that, like I was saying about the corrupting children's minds with different creation theories, I'm not easy on the doctrine. So that year was only a year, because during that year, we were able to go through some really difficult times. 2 people on staff lost their sons. Our really close friends lost their firstborn. He lived for 1 day, and he was born premature, and the pregnancy was sort of like giving these signs, and everyone was praying with them, like for healing, for perfection in the womb, and it didn't happen, and it was really, really hard. I don't say devastating, because it was like shockingly not devastating to them. They're woven into that church community, and it was beautiful to see the way that everyone came around them, and we were able to be with them, and it solidified what was already a lifelong friendship into something really meaningful. And another pastor on staff lost his son in a I I forget what it was a military helicopter accident, an Osprey. And it just went down off the coast of Japan, and their son was in it.
Wow.
And so they searched for him. We had like a vigil, and then we found out that he had died. And so there was just this like heavy times that everyone was going through with them. It's only, I mean, it was growing. So it's probably like 300 people at that time, and maybe even like 400 now. And it came from, 50 to 150 in the origins of that church. So it's a very intimate community, and it was deeply instructive to our faith to go through that, and very valuable. But all through this time, there were signs. I was a pastor, so I'm in all of the pastoral meetings, as an intern, learning how the system works and how we do this and how we do that. And I was sort of like coming to grips with the model and the vision and the way that like we plan everything out and then hope that the Spirit sort of moves. And this was all very different from a 7-person evangelistic discipleship group, which is like, and even, I'm sure many people have this experience of in college, it feels like the world is your oyster, and, like you've got all of these great philosophical ideas or theological ideas, and like, this is how we're going to do it.
Like
And so,
idealism.
yeah. And so I definitely had idealism, and I still do. I'm young, and,
Join the club.
yes. And so that kind of butted up with the real world, and it wasn't bad. Like, it really wasn't bad, but I think I was just aware. I was really, really praying at the time. I learned about John Mark Comer and Dallas Willard sometime in this time frame, like before we went to South Carolina. And so I had developed like the best prayer practice of my life. And it was deeply impactful. Like, I felt spoken to, just aware of God's presence in things. And so that's dangerous, because I was listening to God, and my mind and heart were wrapped up in this job in a way that was like, this secures me, like I have an identity, I have direction. These are good things to have. And I don't want to lose them. And I started to think through and pray through my identity within this church, and specifically on staff, and the answer that we just kept getting was like, this isn't what I have for you. And so that was like devastating, because I was like, this is 100% what you have for us, because we just moved down here and this was the plan. And yeah, and so that rug got pulled out from under me, because I was definitely standing on a rug. Like, this is my foundation.
What was it that was giving you the sense that you didn't need to stay there? Was it related to, you said you were like seeing how things kind of worked behind the scenes? It was like disillusioned, or?
It's a bit of how the sausage is made. I don't
talk about it. And it doesn't have to be about that church, but
right.
Just in general. I mean, this is something I've talked on here a lot, but what are you trying to identify related to how the sausage is made with, American evangelicalism?
One big thing that comes to mind, and I'll just say this so I can speak freely, but apologies to anyone who knows what I'm talking about and is offended. But there's a model of like the big circle, and that's Sunday morning, and everyone comes to the big circle, and that's good, but it's not as good as like small groups or men's groups or one-on-one discipleship connections, And so the smaller and smaller circles is the idea. You want to get people from the big circle into these smaller circles. But what I noticed was that a ton of our time and energy were spent just on the logistics of carrying out a Sunday morning service. And so if 99, let's say 95% of our energy is focused on the big circle, which is the least return according to our own metrics, it was difficult for me to say or to believe what was being said about the importance of small groups and one-on-one discipleship, which I think in actuality, the people that I was having these meetings with, no one would say that this is the case, but the way that it's set up, it demands all of your attention and energy for the big circle, which we already are admitting is not the biggest return. And so it sort of forces you into a place where
Cognitive dissonance.
yeah, and it becomes very personal because on a Sunday morning, it's my job to be there. Like that was very difficult for me. I had and maybe it was just the way that I was thinking about it. It was difficult to differentiate from my participation in the church as a service rendered for funds, like my salary, and as my like service, or you know what I mean? Like I was not, my job was to literally, wash anybody's feet that needed it. Like, oh, you dropped your coffee. Let me go get the paper towels. Like that's what I do on Sunday morning. It's very hospitality oriented. I've been in that industry for a long time. And so I feel like excellent at it. And I'm very good at talking to new people and welcoming people in, but it was just very, cognitive dissonance is a good term for it, because when it came to like, small groups, those were nice, but the whole point was just to make sure that nobody got off track. Like let's not think anything that wasn't talked about in the sermon, because the sermon we know for sure is like on track. And if we like start talking about these other things, then it might cause division or something like that. That was definitely a fear. And to be honest, there really weren't, there was no confrontation. There was no moment of like, or event that took place, which I think is really God, because I have great relationships with everybody there. And I know that a lot of people that go through these cognitive dissonances don't end up having intact relationships. So,
Oh yeah. Which that speaks to your character. I mean, positively. Yeah, there's the attractional model of church, and there's different like gradients and variants of how that plays out and how much emphasis is put where. But at the end of the day, yeah, there's something about the whole framework of basically, if you would say, if Calvary Chapel would identify themselves as, say, evangelical, is this part of evangelicalism? To take it to like the philosophical is, well, if that's the telos, like that's the aim, that's where we're going, then it is to reach, it's to get people. Reach is like the telos, like trying to reach people, and so what do? We attract them here. So but then you have to ask, like, well, what are we attracting them to? Okay, it's the word, right? Or are we trying to get them saved? Like that whole, and then what do we do? Put them in community. But it kind of, it stops short at like, where you're kind of always on the Billy Graham crusade. Like you're like, it stops short of creating, in my perspective, like a Christian rule of life and a Christian pattern of life. And even though all these people are gathering together because we're hoping we're getting people saved, I mean, Paul Vanderklay was doing some treatment on a video that was released by these people that had previously worked at Willow Creek, which is a lot of where all this was based off of, out of the 90s.
Yeah, I watched that and found that history fascinating, because it predominates.
It's everywhere. It's pervasive, and I was on staff at a church practicing all that, much of that, there's, like I said, there's kind of different flavors. Like we're more theological, or we're more like rock and roll, or like, but at the end of the day, you're kind of all kind of trying to turn these levers. Which is kind of what you were describing. It was like, how can we ratchet up our hospitality, our first impressions, and how can we ratchet up our slick this and that production and whatnot. And like I said, there's different levels of which that, levels of health, or how much that's emphasis is put on those things and stuff. So there's people that care about people in all these places. Like, I think you would probably agree with that. It's not like a soulless thing, but yeah, it's interesting that was really, I don't know. Why do you think that you were feeling that? Do you think it's your generation? Do you think was it the Comer, Dallas Willard stuff? Was it Peter, like,
Yeah, well, it was definitely like the people that I was reading. So I was reading the rest of the Comer, or I had read all of Comer, and I was reading the rest of Willard. I started with The Divine Conspiracy because several people recommended it, and it was transformational and excellent. And I read it like every other year because it's a really big book, but it is definitely a foundational element. And then, yeah, so during this time, I also picked up a copy of, like, Francis Chan has maybe it's called Multiply, I think. And it's the same concept as like a Comer when he talks about community, but as a house church model. And so that was sort of the first time I'd come across these things, because again, these things come to me fresh. So I'm like, oh, house church, nobody's ever tried this before. And so I got really into that. I watched a ton of videos about that. And then there's a guy in Vancouver has a thing called Soma, which is like body. And
Vanderselt.
Yeah. Yep.
Jeff Vanderselt. Is that's his name?
Yeah.
Is it, yeah.
And so I was like,
that's missional community stuff. Is that what that is?
Yeah. Yes. Even I can't remember. Oh, it's Rosaria Butterfield. She has that book. Comer references it in some of his sermons. And so I was like looking for it, and then I eventually found it. And she's like kind of a crazy, like, I don't necessarily agree with her on most things, but this concept of hospitality, she's got it down pat, like just radically accepting invitational living. Like the people on the street that nobody talks to or looks at, those are the people that are coming over for dinner. And that's a really cool way to live. And so I definitely had this, it's funny you bring up the sacraments. Comer, and I don't even know your perspective on this. I don't know many people's perspective, but Comer talks about communion initially as a meal. And so it was like the Last Supper. It was supper. And so you're having this meal together in fellowship, and it's extremely significant. And even like anthropologically, the meal is so significant. There's a great book by Tim Chester called A Meal with Jesus, and it just talks about all the meals that Jesus ate, and has some really good ideas about that. And so I was really enamored of community and felt that I had some form of community, but it was definitely like sort of centered on production, at least from my part. Like the role that I played was, maybe like a deacon, like I was waiting the tables. That's my role. And I also have this
Except
sort of
there wasn't
underlying...
an actual table most Sundays. Yes.
Very well done, knowing your Middle Eastern neighbor 2,000 years ago. So I have this underlying disconnect, I think, from growing up without institutions. So I'm not beholden to the ecclesiology or just even the traditions. We had this whole thing while we were there of like the pastor's wife is in charge of the kids, but her kids are no longer in the children's ministry. And so she does that, but like as a last ditch effort every single Sunday. So like nobody can do it. Can you do it? And so she's doing this for the entire time that we were there. And I think she's now not, but it's like 2 years ago that this was happening. And so that was a conversation at every elders meeting. And it was like, well, we got to have something, because if we don't have children's care, then they'll just go down the street to this church. It's like, yeah, like, yeah, I get it. Like, you got to have something, but also a person that we say that we love and care about is sort of being driven insane by our need for childcare to be organized. It's not like she's watching all of the classes, but she's like doing all of the material and making sure the snacks are stocked and all of this stuff while teaching at the school, while being a mom, while being a wife. And so this like burnout model is just the way that it has to be because of traditions. And I'm like, guys, I think we could just have meals, like I think if Rusty just invited us over for dinner, then we could just do that, and that'd be great, and it would work. And
they said, well, then I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah. Yes.
So I
but
mean,
that was real for me too, right? Like,
yeah,
then I wouldn't have a job.
yeah.
I was
I think
with that.
There's this because it's not like Comer was like an anti-mega church,
No.
and the institution, the evangelical marketplace, gives him a nice, he's selling programs and that's all based off of these churches that are attractional. And so I sometimes the part of those kind of like, and even like, how is Francis Chan selling books to all these people? Well, there's like a giant institutional marketplace. And so it's not like, well, if everyone is doing house church, I don't know. Who's going to invite you to speak at what stage, at what, conference at this church. So it's like, for me, hearing what you're talking about in my own experience is like, I did house church for 2 years recently. But we would do kind of a formalized liturgy in our house church. It wasn't just like a Bible study and lunch.
That's easy for you. You have musical talent.
Well, easy. Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of experience. That was like my whole life experience up to that. 6 years, I didn't do any ministry to do anything, but yeah, I was definitely passionate. The whole Hillsong and Passion, like that whole thing swept me up in the early 2000s. And but the question, this frame of like communion, and like how can this is a little challenge to what you're talking about here. But how can you value, not how can you, but like there's a question of how can we make the dinner table sacred if we can't make like the act of communion sacred? Like if we can't, how can we find the relationship between it not devolving into just like chill,
like the Corinthian dinners?
Yeah, like, well, yeah, sure. Yeah, on that level. Yeah, like that would be something like Peugeot's work, but even Peterson, we talk about like a hierarchy of value.
Yeah.
That something with like, I'll try to sell you a little bit on like a sacramental ontology, but like having that, like that, say your meal, your personal meal at work or your family meal or your communal meal is like fractal of the most sacred meal, which is like connecting with Christ in communion.
Yeah.
Like in a way that's not just an idea, but is in a way that's in actually participation. And and so like, again, like these emphasis, like how, it's one thing to like talk about, oh yeah, community, like, yeah, we want community to be, but like, we don't even actually, because that word community and communion are, they're tied. And that's not even like the end point of our worship time is actually not communion. And so, that's some of the thing for me that helps orient, and I'm not talking specifically about one tradition per se, but kind of traditions that allow you to kind of have that hierarchy of like, there's this here and it represents this here and it helps me understand this here and why these are, and even like a sensibility of some kind of like a liturgy of the meal. I have my lunchbox at work. I take it out. I put it in front of me. I say a blessing. I thank God. I partake of my meal. I, clean up and I go back to work. I prepare the meal with my wife, or I'm cooking and my kids are putting out the thing, and then we sit down and we say grace, and then we partake, and then we clean up and we go like that's actually like the liturgy of participation in that. And so it's like these things that can undergird, but even the other piece of it, which is like I can imagine, like you were talking about, like not even having uh like foundationally, like I guess I assume y'all did like celebrated Christmas, maybe
Yeah.
East. Like, did y'all do Easter as a family?
Yeah. Easter, we didn't have any like family traditions around that, maybe because people were working at
Yeah,
church, but Christmas definitely, and Easter, like just not like we did Easter bunny stuff.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's a
It's
holiday.
interesting. It's like it's marking time, and I
Yeah.
think that's one of the values of that, is being able to like find these seasons to like be able to mark time for these practices,
Yeah.
and even for times, because there's seasons where we're not as faithful in our practice, or and then like this time can help remind me to dive back into that faithful practice, or something that like Lent or something like that. Those are things that I've been in response to so much of what like you were experiencing. Like I had that same very much similar experience, uh out of it for different reasons, but evaluating it nonetheless similarly for its, weaknesses or incoherencies of what like you were kind of describing. Um but that, yeah, those are, and they were many in many ways driven by uh kind of like I mentioned Peterson and Peugeot, but like kind of the people in like this corner of the internet. Um, and these even conversations just like this. And so yeah, I don't know. But that's interesting that you ended up leaving there. So like we can kind of
Yeah, we
go.
can.
We took kind of
We're
a
there.
worship tangent, which is bound to happen on this channel occasionally. So
Yes. Yeah. So we decided sort of in the middle, because we got there in the summer, and then we decided sometime in the middle that God was calling us away. So we had a little time to sort of prepare. And in the midst of this, I was crushing Jordan Peterson podcasts and content. The Exodus sermon series, or like
yeah,
discussion series had come out, and I was just blown away. We were actually going through Exodus. Calvary Chapel does verse by verse, so it was like very long. Took a long time to get through, but it was like concurrent, and I was just like, there's no comparison.
mm,
And the guy that was teaching is great, and he did a great job, but the audience is different. The audience is the lowest common denominator, which is not a bad thing. It's just the audience. And so for the Peterson conversations, all of my philosophical, interests were being met in different ways, and even creatively. Like Greg Hurwitz always has something so good to say about the literary importance of something in the story. And so I was like really deep in that. I was doing a lot of Bible project classes at the time. I just found that they had that classroom thing. So I was, I can't read Hebrew, but I was going through like whatever level those kind of classes are. And Tim Mackey has a ton of sermons too, and even like conferences where he teaches through a book. So I was doing all of that stuff. And there was definitely some dissonance there because I was young, for one. So it's definitely like I'm to be taught, and I'm learning sort of how we handle the scriptures and what generally we think as a group that they say. And so I was like, I don't feel like these are necessarily substantiated, like, or definitive claims about what the Bible says. So that was a little bit disturbing to me, just
what do you
imagining.
on the Tim Mackey, the classes? You didn't feel like they were definitive claims on like
The
hermeneutics?
opposite. I felt like Mackey was getting at the core of something that I was phenomenologically experiencing in my walk with God. But the Calvary Chapel sort of doctrines were a little bit more rigid, or not creative, or limiting in their application, because it was definitely more propositional than participatory. Those are the words I've been using now with Vervaeke's help. But just like, this is what's going to happen in the end times. We don't know, but we know, like it's pretty
So there
certain.
was a lot of dispensational stuff that was kind of the aim for a lot of the teaching, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
which is which is foundational for them. That's like foundational for that movement.
Yes. Yeah.
My
Yeah,
pastor grew up at going to Chuck Smith's church.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
I know some of the lore. Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that you put that too, it's foundational for the church. It's definitely that way where like it is. And I've been recognizing this just recently. Like, I think something new is happening, and it doesn't mean that all the old things are falling away or are irrelevant. In many cases, we see like orthodoxy is having this resurgence. And so it's like, and even Catholicism, which Protestants are uncomfortable with that because they're literally protesting Catholicism. But a couple conversations
or reforming it.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah. Your conversations recently have been helping me understand just that idea. Like the best of Protestantism is reforming what is true about church on a Catholic level, a universal level. And that's, we're getting there to the podcast and the corner, but we're almost done.
No, keep going. We can go. We can keep going.
So all I was trying to say there is I just have been recognizing more and more recently that there is something happening to where more people are being welcomed in. And in some ways, these denominations, I was a part of one specifically, but I know this happens all over the place at every different possible point of contention. We split. And I liked what's his name again? Cadell. All right. So Cadell, sorry, buddy.
God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
Yeah. He was saying that like God is found in that break. And so I feel like I just read a quote from somebody, John Keats maybe, about the theory is gray, but feeling is green. And so he's saying like there's no life in theory, but in experience there is life. And I think that that's been sort of the way that I've lived up to this point in my Christian journey of like, okay, it's cool that we think that this is important, but like, I don't know that it's 100% important to even the people currently that are attending these sermons and participating in these rituals. But you mentioned like Chuck Smith and his church, it was important to him, right? And so now it's important to all the Calvary chapels, but like, well, I don't know what's important to my pastor Brennan at that church, like, because he is talking about what's important traditionally, and that's perfectly legitimate, but it just seems to me like there are some things, it's not like he only ever preached about topics relevant to the 70s, but it's like, where are we at today, and what is the value, or what are we missing by shoehorning?
Sorry. Hold on just a second. What? It didn't make this. Oh, okay. But I know. Yeah. I understand. Middle of the conversation. Huh? We're not live, but we're recording. All right. Okay. Let's I apologize. So sorry.
You're good.
The foundation, we'll get there in just a second. I'm gonna have to pause and collect my thoughts for a second.
Yeah, we were on a tangent.
So the parts about what are important to kind of these frameworks, these denominations, and different things that uh, what even from how you've even like unpacked your story is reflective of what's taking place digitally and then what's taking place embodied, and even kind of the gray and the green is kind of symbolic to that to some degree. But it's like, um you know, if you have access to the quote unquote best Christian teaching, or stuff that is like making sense to like you, the way you described it, like phenomenologically or in your soul, or as the East would say, like the noose and these different things, um, what becomes more important in your religious participation is like the participation of it, not as much on the like the teaching. And there's something interesting that's talking about how the digital is reclaiming the medieval, or
Mm,
recapturing that, because so much of like memes and even just like we're visually getting so much information. Somebody even like Redeem Zoomer and his like what he does on the internet with his like his little paint stories. And what that does is then you're like, oh, okay, well, I've got some like catechesis and I've got like these access. And not that to devalue preaching, but I think that preaching is going to have to like also shift in what its aims and goals are. If if you can listen to John Mark Comer on the internet, or who, like
yeah.
and Tim Keller, and like so many of these things that people have been doing. But even like, what's the question for Sunday school if I can go on Tim Mackey and get like this all these questions that we're like wrestling with. And is there maybe, like, because then the necessity for communion, for community begins to ramp up, because the pedagogical and the, kind of propositional parts of our knowing related to our faith are being filled in other places. That it's creating a possibility for need, which is why one of the things it's like, I don't even need to know this language. I just need to participate in, like Latin mass, or
Mm,
and I'm receiving so much aesthetically from beauty related to this story and this history. And I can learn about the symbology of it from, 5 YouTube videos, and I can appreciate what's happening symbolically in my faith. Like, so all these things are happening. Um, and it's, for some, evangelicalism is like, which is kind of a far reaching point of the protest, and like in a certain way. And yeah, so I think a lot of that's at play. It's at play for a lot of people. It's been at play for me. It sounds like it's at play for you.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so go ahead.
So, 100%. And that's really why we're having this conversation, even though we're going to talk about it for 5 minutes at the end. But the 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 reason is because I immediately locked into uh like Jordan Hall when I started listening to him, because he is talking in the same kind of way as Peterson about Christianity, but with a ton more like practice in his language. You can just tell, like, I I asked him if he would come on my show, and he said yes. I think, sort of. He said not yet, but eventually maybe. And so I've just been like cramming like for an exam, and it's probably going to ruin the episode. But what I've been picking up is the way that he just fundamentally acts out his faith is so refreshing to me, because there's so much of like why you should do something. And it's so funny because I'm a why person. I want to know, why are we doing this? And there's so much of that rationalization for the faith in the modern world that comes through the evangelical sermons that I'm hearing. And that's well and good. I tend to enjoy, the best sermons that I hear. And and I tend to sort of glaze over for the ones I'm like, yeah, I heard that. I know that already. I know the why behind this sermon. But then when it comes down to it, it's like the what or the how, those are like bullet points at the end, and we don't have the relational capital to like actually ask somebody to do these things. Like I did a sermon on fasting, and I don't know if anybody fasted because I'm a pastoral intern. I don't have that relationship with anybody. I don't have any like authority in their life to say, hey, I was reading the Bible and it says you should fast. You wanna, like there's nothing behind me saying that other than the scripture. But it's sort of, that's not, I don't think that's the way that human beings work, right? So that's all I was thinking when you were just laying that out, is like, I just talked to Ross Bird, and it was a great episode. I'll plug that. Like, if you go to my channel, watch that one. It was a really good conversation. And we talked about this idea of the need for authority in your life, but the way that authority works is through a loving relationship. It's not through a top-down sort of, this is what we do and you better do it or else. And so the way we typically think of authority sort of precludes us from the benefits of having spiritual authority in our
It's
life.
abstracted.
Yes. And then there's another problem of like the people who should have authority at this point in their maturation through relationship with Jesus don't really want to take that responsibility onto themselves. It's not really been a part of their, and we could say liturgy, like the liturgy of their lives, like there's no space in the churches that I've been a part of. Like, I'm sure there are many places where this is encouraged, and people always say like, oh, I just want a Paul or I want a Timothy, that sort of thing for discipleship. But it's the 95-5 thing. Like, if you're putting 95% into the sermon, then there's all of this sort of, I've been referring to pastors as like large language models. There's a rational large language understanding that he has, and that's his authority. But then from there, like, what does he have to say about how you actually live your life? And
the telos of the growth movement is to actually continually separate the pastor from the congregation. Ultimately, because he becomes like this abstracted knowledge machine, that is, supposed to help me go out and live my individual life. But it's not like through that relationship. And so, and again, it's like trying to, we're trying to get all these people here, and we're supposed to get them in a small group, but it's like, so the thing grows, and but even like part of it is not even like the models are built off of business models about scale, not growth.
Yeah, and that's the medium is the message, because you would never hear that. Well, from the people that I've worked with, you would never hear that. No. We don't do anything that we do for the purpose of attraction. We're not like those churches. And yet the medium that they've adopted is the message. And so whether or not they intend that to be the outcome, that is unfortunately what happens.
And so architecture matters, space matters, how we orient and what it does to our attention matters. And so that's why some of the traditional historical things do that. Now, are they perfect, or are there flaws in authority and leadership and all that? 100%. And even have they been influenced and impacted by Rick Warren and Saddleback? Like, yes, like all that stuff's inescapable when you're in these kind of. But I think somebody
I just
like
heard that about. I just heard that about the Orthodox Church. Like, somebody was talking to somebody from that church in a position of authority, and they're like concerned about how to grow because they were not growing for so long. It's like, well, we went from 2% to 4%. So now what? Like, how do we keep going to 5 and 6%? It's like,
yeah, and a lot of those Protestant converts are going to have a lot of tricks in their bag left over from how to do these things, and so it's like the very thing that you come here in a certain way, and it's like, but then there's like kind of that ring of power that comes into play, and all this stuff. One of the things that I love about our sanctuary is it literally only seats 150 people. It's very small. It can't even, and there's no parking lot. There's like
So what
two
do you
parts
do?
of a,
Eight services?
no, we aren't that big. But it's like, even if, I mean, there's like, I'm not doing things personally to try to like attract people in the way that's like for entertainment sake. Like the thing that's driving me is for people to participate in like a Christian rule of life, like, a liturgical life, and that's why these, like, we have seasons. And even why does it work well to have like holiday seasons, and why does it work well to have school seasons, and why does it work well to have sports seasons? It's because that's like how we're made, actually. And everything that and so it's like these kind of seasons within like a church calendar help it breathe, help your life, like right when you're like tired of Christmas, it's like, okay, well, now it's this. And right when you're tired of the Easter season, now we have a common time where we're not as like intense. And it's like these type of things. That's just one example. But um but if it's all pedal to the metal, like you were saying with the pastor's wife, like where's the reprieve? Where's the breathing? And if it's like constant, in a sense, like if it's like, well, if we can just grow, then we'll get the volunteers we need and all this kind of stuff, instead of like just focusing on like, look at who you have, and just being like, we're only real and legitimate when we reach this benchmark. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't like that. Like, where's the legitimacy? Like, for me, it's something like, are we like, are we participating in the sacraments and the preaching of the word? Like that legitimizes this gathering to me. And so where it gives you like that marker, it's like, oh, we're not truly legitimate. Like, and even if people, like you said, people aren't saying this, there's like this spirit in which you kind of feel that pull. And it's like I said, you said it's everywhere, it's pervasive. But yeah, so you started this podcast. Like, how did what made you make that leap? As we're kind of closing down,
Yeah.
finally get to this answer of this question.
Yeah, yeah. So we moved back because we had our son, and that was sort of a leap of faith sort of thing, and it did a lot to sort of mature what God had been speaking to me during that time of like, um, I've been describing it as like integration. Like I need to make what is on the inside of me be on the outside of me. I had this story in my past of the pornography and other addictions that created duplicity in my life. And
Mm,
so the self that I present I'm very comfortable presenting an alternative self. And
mm,
so I just needed to bring out what was on the inside. And part of that was definitely necessitating the move. And so I maybe preempted that. You said it was my good character, but it was definitely like some intuition about the way that some of the things that I think or believe, or just don't think or don't believe, would land in a certain space. And so with that, when we had our son, I was able to take some like state paid leave thing and spend time at home. But he's a baby, he's sleeping. And I've been talking to my wife about like, you know, uh, I just found this corner of the internet. So my wife was that corner for me for a long time, and she had to listen to every different thing that I was like, are you kidding me? Did you know that this thing about neuroscience maps onto this thing about the Orthodox liturgy? It's like she doesn't care. She thinks I'm cool, so she's like nice to me or whatever. But it was something I talked about, having a podcast to have these conversations. And like I just was saying, I know there have to be people that there's millions of people that watch Jordan Peterson. There have to be somebody else out there that I could talk to. And maybe early on I was thinking like, and get their views on my channel or whatever. But like, I just felt this desire for connection with people that wouldn't be like, oh, gross, you think that? Or, can you just say what we all say about this topic? Like, don't think a different thing. And so that's what I was longing for. and I created the channel in February of this year, and I asked my buddy to do it with me because I think more comes out of me in conversation than just by myself. So I didn't want to do it I didn't even know who to talk to necessarily for guests or anything. So yeah, we've done it for, I think, pretty much every week since February, and it's been really, really good. I've gotten to talk to lots of different people. Joel Carini was the first one I found on Substack. We were talking about Christian nihilism, was a term my friend James Wilkins, who's on the podcast with me, he brought that up, and I was like, oh yeah, like that's a real thing. I didn't know that. So I Googled it, and Joel Carini had a thing on Substack about it. So that was like my first real guest, like where it wasn't my dad or somebody that I knew reaching out to somebody else for me. And yeah, it's just been so like fruitful is a very Christian way to put it, but it really has produced growth and sustenance in my life through conversation. Yeah. And I guess the idea, like even as we were talking, I was thinking, oh yeah, it's kind of the natural progression of this, where I'm recognizing that there are people talking about things that are more relevant to me than more relevant perspectives to my own perspective on these sacred scriptures and practices and traditions. And so my connection there leads me to then sort of imitate and participate online in a way that I can integrate and sort of display the things that I've been thinking about and the reasons that I think they're important, etc. So it's just been a lot of conversations about God and Jesus. We've talked about nihilism and existentialism and lots of isms. And yeah, so that's the short version.
Ian, I'm glad that you came here to share your story today. Hopefully you'll continue to connect people that watch this, people live streams with like Luke, and you've been on PBKs too. And, I've seen you bouncing around. So, and I think I even saw you on a Discord somewhere checking out something. And so it's been good, man. And I resonate. The story you just told is very, very similar to my own, and I'm just a little further down the road in those conversations. And so reach out to people that you see on these live streams, ones that are interesting you, pull them on. They'll have plenty to talk about, I promise you.
Yeah.
Check out my back catalog. You'll recognize some of the faces and different people that have been participating and stuff. So yeah, man, everybody, Insight Incorporated with Ian Campbell. Check him out. And we'll see you around the corner, man.
Awesome.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.